All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Habel. I am the member in charge at Frost Brown Todd here in the Cincinnati office. I was just joking with Todd in the Westchester. They have a moat up there, I understand, between them and the library. I've got a river. The windows, the shades were down. I'm like, is there anybody got a PowerPoint? They're like, no. So I put shades up because it's been gray for 6 months and we should all see a little sunshine. So it is great to have everybody here. On behalf of the firm, welcome. Just a couple quick housekeeping things. One, the man door in the far back corner will let you in and out without having to roll the big doors open and closed. Restrooms are right outside to the left. Happy hour will be directly across, and you can watch batting practice on the other side of the lobby. And feel free to walk the floor. Pretty much everything you can get into is fine, and take a look around. If you haven't been up here before, it is a pretty spectacular view. Firm's obviously a very large firm, but this is really important to me. Todd and I have been working a fair amount on this. We had a little get together with the folks that you're going to hear from today a few months ago, and people think the firm, big giant firm, they're too big for the middle market, blah, blah, blah. I get all that, I understand, and yes, we do work for some very large companies. I think the advantage that gives us is I'm an environmental lawyer. I have a civil engineering degree. You want to know deep on environmental stuff, I can do it in 3 seconds off the top of my head. And Todd knows where to find me, and that exists all throughout the firm. So there's the pitch. I won't pitch anymore. Thank you all for being here. It's great to have everybody, and I'll turn it over to Sean, who will lead this rodeo.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, I'm just going to take a picture right now. Forget it. So if you don't want your picture taken, put your hand over your face, because you look good. Everybody looks good. The guy who puts his hand over his face, it's going to be really obvious who you are. And I'm sure everybody, if you haven't taken this picture yet, you need to take that picture. There's a better one on the other side for later on, so do that. My name is Sean O'Shaughnessy. I'm the CEO and president of a company called New Sales Expert. I'm a fractional VP of sales, and I was asked to be the moderator of this group, so I'm not going to talk much at all. I'm not going to answer any questions if I possibly can avoid them. I'm just going to let them do all the work. So Todd, can you introduce yourselves, tell us what you do, and then kind of turn the table down to people beside you.
Sure. So I'm Todd Wilkowski. I'm a member here at Frost Brown Todd, although I work out of the Westchester office primarily. Before I came to Frost Brown, I was at Baker Concrete Construction as their general counsel, and why that's important is because the practice that I run here now is a fractional outsourced general counsel practice to small to medium-sized private businesses.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Brewer, and I lead the HR consulting practice at Von Lehman. So I have a team of HR and talent management leaders that work with small to mid-sized organizations and providing any type of HR help needed, anywhere from talent acquisition through to strategy. And similar to Todd, I came from a background, and my whole team has, of internal HR management, so we really understand the needs of the small to mid-sized organization.
Nice job. Maybe it's up.
No, I turned it on for you.
Thank you. You can tell I'm an accountant. My name is Allison Steiner. I am an outsourced controller in the Client Accounting and Advisory Services Group with Von Lehman. We are a department of, I believe, 16 to 18 now, and our services range from fractional CFO to any sort of outsourced accounting arrangement that your organization might need. We specialize in a couple different areas, and we have a lot of different engagements in companies that are your size. So thanks for having us.
Hi, my name is Amy Connor, and I lead a company called CMO on Loan. That's Chief Marketing Officer on Loan. We help mid-market companies, if you've caught a trend yet, we help mid-market companies who do not have a marketing leader full-time, and they don't want one, but they could use the marketing expertise. My background is I worked at the IMS company when it was privately held in Dayton, and then Procter & Gamble and brand management, and then left my VP of marketing job at LensCrafters. And when I left, a dear friend called Todd Wilkowski said, how about you start a business and help mid-market companies? I, of course, said, no way, I'm never going to do that. And then 5 years later, it's the best decision I ever made. So happy to be here.
And if you haven't figured out the reason that I'm not over there with the remote microphones because this microphone always works now on that board. So I have a couple questions I'm going to ask, but I do want to turn it over to you eventually to ask questions. So please think of insightful questions that you might want to ask our panel. So my first question, I'll just take it right in order. Todd, I'll start with you. From your perspective, as the outsourced chief legal officer for a company, what is the biggest advantage of using a fractional expert with your experience?
Make sure I can make this work. First of all, it's great to see everybody. Are we ready to do this again? Amen, right? And the other thing I was going to point out is we have so many, I hope you will take the opportunity to connect, because there are so many folks. We are serving the middle market. There are thought leaders in this group. We just happen to be a smattering of this, and also just blessed to have some clients that I serve as a general counsel to, like Cynthia Booth, in the audience. So I think there's a growth scale. You can't hear me? You can't? Can you hear me now? Yeah. How about now? There we go. That works. Okay, so when coming from Baker and seeing that there's a life cycle of a company, right? You start as an entrepreneur, you are the CEO, CMO, everything. And then at some point, if you've read Traction, about 10 million, you realize you're a CEO and you hate the stuff that a COO does, right? Because they implement and you want to go out and cast vision and sell. So that life cycle continues. And so we kind of seen almost at 350 million, it doesn't make sense to bring on a general counsel. They're very expensive. And frankly, if they can't be deprogrammed, they're going to be an impediment to your business because they're going to be about, no, we can't do that. It's too risky. And you're like, well, we're going to do it. So kind of help me walk through it, right? And if not, then they don't survive. So that's the kind of practice, we're appealing to companies that culturally and financially really are not ready for that GC, but don't know it's an option to have someone who's going to come alongside of them and really act more as a business advisor that's been in the trenches, is going to help them grow. Like, that's what makes me excited, is growth. It's not defense. You can't win on defense. You can tie, right? You got to be able to win. And so that's kind of what we're bringing to that we've scaled down what I was doing at Baker. And I worked for, if you know Dan Baker, I mean, there's no entrepreneur like Dan Baker, right? Put your big boy and big girl pants on and get ready to rock and roll. And if you're not ready to grow, you're done. So kind of bringing that mentality to entrepreneurs and business owners that are ready to take risks and succeed.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to do the same question all the way down. So Deidre, what is the biggest advantage from your perspective as using a fractional expert? And maybe it's passing the microphone. Maybe that works. So.
Well, in our team, we jokingly say too that having a fractional CHRO is all about having all of the commitment without the long-term obligation. And that really, even though it's a joke that we have, that it's sort of like dating, we can do it for a little while, but we don't have to always. It really is that person who can come in and bring in that additional expertise, or provide some capacity, or provide just that sounding board. Sometimes we joke, we have a client that says, "Can you be my phone a friend?" And to be able to help an organization when they don't necessarily have the resources to do that on a full-time, regular basis, but to be able to really help them through those areas where they need that guidance, and really to make sure that in doing that we are giving them kind of that opportunity to build that into their organization and be able to step it back too.
Allison, same question for you. Okay.
Drop my mom voice. Yes? No? Yes. I tell our clients that I think one of the advantages about bringing in our group is focus. So what we have the ability to do is sort of focus in on exactly what the client needs, or what we define with the client that they need, and sort of push out all the other stuff. So for those of you in the accounting and finance function, there's a lot of things that touch the accounting and finance function that aren't related to accounting and finance and can distract that team. So we can come in and, again, like Deirdre said, short-term, long-term, mid-term, really help on a special project, really help set an organization on a particular path, I can say right now I have a client who has experienced exponential growth without exponential improvement in their accounting and finance, and we've really been able to come alongside them for the last couple months and partner with them from our perspective, and then also coach their internal accounting staff. So I really think it's about just being able to focus in on exactly what you need without being distracted maybe on some other ancillary issues of the organization.
Awesome. And Amy, the same thing.
Yeah. So when I meet small business owners, the first thing they'll say is, back before I had the business, man, I could use your firepower. I just don't think I need it every day. And my response was, you don't need it every day. First, I drive you absolutely bonkers. So let's not go there. But also, most of my clients, they're all business to business. They're a lot of the companies, the best stories you've never heard. They've tried and true in this area. They've grown like crazy without me. So my goal is confidence for them to get to the next level. So the big benefit of bringing in someone who is, to your point, I love focus. It's going to help you focus and growth. Of course, I love to grow things. At the Imus company, we sold dog and cat food at dog shows. And I think that's still stuck in my head. I still have that sales mindset. And so I love to work with hand in hand sales and marketing to go grow, but it's that confidence that sales is going to have a place for that next lead. Not literally probably that next lead. I'm not just a lead generator, but I'm here to help build the systems, the processes, the communications, the expectations, so that it is a fuel for growth ongoing, not just short term. So it's confidence, fuel for growth ongoing.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to answer the same question that I just asked them. I'll answer from a VP of sales standpoint. So a fractional VP of sales comes into an organization. It's usually a young company. Company's been around for whatever, 2 to 10 years, whatever. And the owner that started that company didn't know anything about sales. And some of you started your own companies. You didn't know anything about sales when you started. You were good at something else when you started your company. And so you get to a certain point, you realize that you actually were the best salesperson in the company because everybody went to you and asked all those tough questions to get that deal closed. But eventually you couldn't answer all the questions because you had to run the company. You had to build the machines or ship the product or whatever the case might be. Whatever you were really good at, that's what you should focus on. And you started hiring salespeople, but you didn't know what they were. And you know what? Salespeople are hard to hire because we're weird. We act differently. We're inspired differently than everybody else in the company. And so you don't know how to hire them. And they come in, and salespeople are good at selling one thing really well, and that's themselves. And so they come in and they convince you they're fantastic, and then you find out that they're not. So you start firing a few salespeople and you start getting frustrated. And I've literally had a CEO look at me and say, tomorrow, and by the way, somebody from the company is actually in this audience, might have been in that conversation. Tomorrow, I feel like I'm going to fire every single one of my salespeople because I just don't trust them. They can't do the job. Today, everybody in that company is still there. And I help them figure out that the salespeople can work, they can work hard, they can be effective, they can be accountable, they can hit their goals, and we can make this thing happen, and we can make the company grow. So that's what a VP of sales does, is fractional. So it's somebody that comes in with more experience than you're gonna have inside of your company and comes in and solves the problems. And then for me, at least, and I think I'm different from others here, I'm gonna shake your hand after a certain number of months and say, thank you very much. Don't break it, it's all working. It's all on you now, and call me if you have a problem. Because I'm gonna go off and I'm gonna help somebody else, because I can't help everybody at once. So that's what I do from my perspective. So I do have another, and please, if you have questions, put your hand up, but I do have another question kind of canned up here. So we talked a little bit, and they were like, Sean, make sure there's easy questions. So I said, okay, give me your questions and answer, but they all asked essentially the same second question. So I'm going to ask the question, and so I'm going to kind of homogenize it across all of you. When do you need your services, or when does a customer need your services versus a full-time equivalent of that position? Yeah, let's start with Amy, just to mix it up a little bit.
Pressure's on. Okay, for us, first, I would tell you, if I come into a company and you don't have a strong sales group, it's because most of our business is B2B. Let me just say that. Most of our clients are B2B, and you need sales. So that's because if you ever want a marketing ROI, by the way, If you don't have the sales numbers, you can't get the marketing ROI. So sales to me is number one. So if you want to come in and you say, oh, I need to hire a marketing person, I would first make sure the structure and the strategy is in place, and then think about hiring a full-time marketing person. To your point, you want to have the benefit of the strategy of the long-term plan and then get a person in there who can implement. It is hard to find a senior marketing person in this market, at any market, but in this market. And they're a lot of times not going to want to do the more detailed work. So a lot of our clients, what they prefer to do is get the strategy in place and then find the people who can do it, who are in the market, in the marketing department. And that's usually what happens with us. So where we would say, if you don't have a full-time leader, you don't want one full-time, what usually happens is they bring us in, we build the plan, we begin implementing it, and then there's usually a person internally who has been dying for direction that can take it and run with it. And sometimes they'll hire someone, but generally you want a full-time marketing leader much later, and you just don't need one, especially in most of the businesses we work with. So that's how we think about it in marketing.
Allison, you want to go next?
I think one thing my group does is we tend to do what we call a client assessment. So somebody comes to us and say they need support in their accounting finance function. That might look like all sorts of different things depending on what you're already doing, what personnel you already have, what systems are you using. And so sometimes we can't answer that question until we take a step back and take a deep dive into processes and procedure and personnel and see how it's already working or not working, and then we can make a better recommendation about what you might need. It may be that you need temporarily a CFO to lay down some greater strategy and greater vision, but what you might need is better staffing at different levels. So we try to take that question and answer it with the client because, again, we want to work ourselves into and quite possibly out of a job if we're doing a good job at what we're doing and setting you up for success. So that's a question we generally try to answer with our clients.
Very good. How about you, Deidre?
Well, so that was exactly one of the things that I was thinking was, I think what I've heard all of us saying too is that we really, as we are working with organizations, it is in that partnership. We're not coming in and, as an HR person, if I wore all black, for example, to work someday, people are like, oh gosh, she's getting fired, right? So, we come in and we're not the cops. We're not going to say you have to do it this way. But that we are coming in to partner to say, how can we help this organization? So many times when people are contacting our group, some of it may be because the person who's handling human resources, it is not their highest and best use. I have a chief technology officer that called me and said, I hate HR. And I said, yeah, I love it. And that makes me sick. I get that. But we're here to help you. We can help you then work in your highest and best use. And we're going to be able to continue helping make sure that you are compliant. Other times when we find organizations need us is because they have, to your point, they have a strategy they need to implement. Maybe they have a big project. Sometimes it is another pain point. For example, right now, so many organizations are saying, we're having trouble retaining our employees, or we're having trouble attracting people to the organization. So sometimes it's because of growth and it's really positive, and it's because they're moving forward and need that help. And sometimes it's because there's a real pain point and they realize they need to transform what they're doing. And what I've heard all of us saying is we love to partner to be able to help with that.
And the good news is there's no hiring or retention issues right now. So, yeah, you're waiting for your phone to ring. So we see it happen three ways. The first one is we are working with 7 different law firms, and we don't have enough time to manage the daily operations. And we'd like to have one point of contact who we know, who's going to pick up the phone, who knows our business, and is about getting to yes. And so I basically play a legal concierge, a consigliere, practical problem solver. I'm not going to put a horse head in your bed, but other than that, I'm going to find a way to solve the problem. The other one would be, generational changes, and the father, the mother started the business. Maybe they have a lawyer that they went to elder with. That person's retiring. They're retiring. Smaller firm, no succession plan. So they're looking for somebody that they can grow with. And then I think the other issue is people are growing. And, as they grow, they encounter a lot more complicated issues. And so the reality is a generalist while they can provide you with that relationship, they can't provide you with the bench. And so when I started this, there were a few people that were doing the outside fractional, but it was one person. And there's value in that, right? For 10, 20 hours or maybe a month. But they're going to have to learn on your dime if it gets too complicated, or it's going to take them a long time. And then you don't know if that research that's recent is really good. So what we do is, like Chris said, he's an environmental lawyer. You don't want to pay me to learn environmental law, but you're going to run across environmental issues, right? And so I have access. So I get you the right person, and that person is dealing with those issues on a regular basis, has the latest knowledge, best practices, and can provide advice. Anybody can provide product, provide advice, understand your problem, and then give you options. So that's where we see we can come into play. But let's put it this way. If your company says, we're a family business, we're just kind of lifestyle, I'm like, check. I'm not the right person. And by the way, I got about 100 lawyers. They'd be happy to represent you. So.
Very good. So I'm going to answer the same question, and then I'm really going to look for somebody to ask the question here pretty soon. So the question was, when do you need me versus a full-time equivalent of me? And the answer is going to be immediately after I leave. So you may have already had that person before I was there. It didn't work out. That's the reason that the CEO is talking to me. But immediately after I leave, the last thing I do, actually, if it's a 6-month or a 12-month engagement, I'm going to hire my replacement, and I'm going to train my replacement as I walk out the door. And when I shake that CEO's hand and say, don't break it, I'm really talking to the new VP of sales, or maybe he's a sales manager because he doesn't have as much experience as I do. But I'm really saying, don't let him break it. Don't let her break it, because she's in charge. But it's going to all work. So you need a full-time equivalent salesperson when I leave. And that's going to be after a finite amount of time. In fact, I'm going to tell you straight up, I'm leaving on this day. So let's just get ready for it, because we're going to work towards that day. And I'm going to work towards that statement of work right away. So, but that's just how I go about running my business. So I still don't see any hands coming up. Oh, Tim. Just push the button on the bottom.
Okay, speak loud enough. Thank you. My name's Sam Matilium. We have like 65 employees now, and we've been debating when to build HR, right? So I'm an entrepreneur, like Todd said. Like, I don't want to build HR because I feel like it makes the company more bureaucratic, and people telling me what can't do today, right? Being transparent. Don't say that. Don't do that. Don't touch that. Okay, fine. Sorry. But then we also need it. Well, I gotta understand there's value. We have a full-time recruiter to integrate HR into time, okay, right? Would it be wiser for us to start with an outsourced CHRO who can come in and tell us what we don't know, or is it better for us to hire a full-time generalist, at our size? What's the right play, given that we want to keep that like small, fast-growing type company feel, right? But we need to make sure that
when we work with clients, one of the first things we do, very similar to what Allison mentioned, is an assessment of the organization. So to me, that sounds like that may be a good spot for you, is to come in and look. Some of the things you've been doing very well so far. You wouldn't be at the place where you were without that. So to get an assessment and start to say, what are the areas that we would say these fall into a red bucket, a yellow bucket, a green bucket? You might have reds where we go, oh my gosh. Okay, we're not saying don't do it, but you might think about perhaps there's real risk here. But then to say too, well, what does the organization look like? What might your HR structure look like? We just worked with a client in a very similar capacity. They didn't have HR. They were hesitant to have HR because they felt like HR, we were going to come in and tell them all the things they needed to do differently, and they liked what they were doing. So instead, we came in, helped them understand, this is what your landscape is like. This is what we think the ideal person to come into this role would look like. This is the skill set you'd need, the background, even that fit factor will help you find that person. And then similar to what Sean was saying, really help onboard that person and then be available to help coach them through. So we still periodically, it's about every 2 weeks, check in with her. We're providing some coaching to her. When she gets to a point where she doesn't have capacity, we're then stepping in and we're helping her with things like, for example, she has a training program she just can't facilitate on her own. So we're going to be able to come in and help her out with that. Thanks for asking.
Can I just say real quick? You want to make a bad hire? Hire an HR person. I mean, no, I'm saying, and then give them all the access. No, I'm sorry. Oh, that was bad. I'm bad. Yeah. Hey. Hey, let me finish. Sorry. What I meant is then try to fire them because they're a bad hire. And then they know where all the bones are buried. I mean, and I happen to handle a few of those cases, or I did in my former life. Those are the worst cases. So I think that's the other thing. The other thing is HR is cultural or their compliance. And many times people, and frankly, we've got that reputation, you do too, but right now, what's the most important thing is you are scaling for growth. Culture, and it's preserving your culture. And how do you preserve culture? It's who you hire, right? And so that's, you got to have somebody strategically because somebody's got to own that. And so that's when I think they provide a great role is when you're in growth, because you don't have a lot of compliance requirements like some companies do, where if they don't comply, then they're out of business. Right, versus a lot of other companies who have a lot of creative problem solving. So sorry, hopefully I corrected myself. I'm just saying, if you hire a bad HR person, you will rue the day you did that. So it's kind of nice to have a trial run to start with. Sorry.
Dovetailing what the two of you were just talking about, talk about fiefdom within those size companies that then when you're beholden to that one person, opposed to somebody who has not necessarily a reason to build their own fiefdom within that small 1 or 2 or 3 person department. You want all of us to answer that, or you guys, whichever, doesn't matter. Because I think it's a general question.
We run into that quite frequently in the accounting and finance function in that it's okay, but a company starts and they have somebody and it does really well and that person stays, and because that person maintains a big bandwidth and capacity, they're still doing the entire accounting finance function 20 years later. So fast forward, we all can't escape the fact that we age, right? And companies evolve and things change, and so now you're in a spot, right? You're in a tough spot as a company where you have one person managing a big chunk of your business, and so you do have to manage that transition and figure out a way to do it. And I've done it a number of times, and currently am doing it. In that we've just taken a look back to the assessment idea. We've taken a look holistically, the organization as a whole and the accounting and finance function, and what does this company need to move, what do they need to move forward? And so taking the baby steps to do that, because what you don't want to happen is that person who has a fiefdom and has been in an organization, and no matter where, for that much time, you don't want them to walk out the door, and that is all the knowledge of the company goes straight down the drain and out the door. So you do have to figure that way out. But it's a cautionary tale that you want to, as business owners, you want to make sure that's not happening in any place in your company. Redundancy is really important, and having backup and having those that can, go cross departments or, cross function. So yeah, I've done that a few times. It's not my favorite thing to do.
Well, we find a similar issue with sales and marketing. A lot of times we go into a business and we do an audit, and sometimes with them our sales buddies, and we ask, what are your KPIs? What are your key performance indicators for both sales and marketing? Do they relate? Do you have shared goals? Do you meet, and not just meet to get requests in for another sales slick, but do you meet to discuss what markets are important to us? So what we find is getting everyone aligned around the numbers, which of course salespeople are usually very motivated to be aligned around, and then the fact that marketing's willing to put numbers on top of that helps to show accountability. We found that's the baby step for us to get going. Then when it comes into organization, that's well down the line, but luckily we have that mechanism of bringing together what we would call integrated sales and marketing plans with shared KPIs is how we've been able to address that.
I'm just going to add on to that just a little bit. So in sales, the reason that somebody brings me in is because their sales aren't what they want them to be. It's kind of simple concept there. So I get hired to be the change agent in the company. So it's not unusual for me to say, look, you are blocking this fiefdom that you built is not healthy. And I won't use these exact words, so I'll be a little bit more blunt here and be quick. But you're not helping the situation by doing this. And because I'm outside and because everybody knows I am leaving, I have no vested interest. I'm not going to get promoted. I'm not taking over the company. They know that all I have is the best interest to drive revenue in the company. That does tend to help break down those fiefdoms that do happen in small companies, probably a little bit bigger than some of the big companies like IBM and Oracle that I used to work for, where we had fiefdoms too, but it wasn't family-owned fiefdoms, right? So that becomes a little bit of a challenge sometimes still. So anybody else have any comments on this? Any other questions?
Jacob Holbrook, Financial Bank. Thanks for everybody that's on the panel. I know being front on your toes and answering questions is always tough. But my question is a question that I always ask myself, my team, is what makes for a good engagement with a client, the behaviors, and then what's the behaviors that lead to construction of the relationship that you have with your client? So what makes a successful engagement? What makes that okay?
Specifically, you want to answer the question?
I'll answer, or whoever wants.
Scott, you want to go first?
I think for me, part of it is changing kind of the paradigm of what the role is. And so what I find clients really appreciate, and it's a differentiator, but all of us, I think, are and should be doing this, is what looks like success to you? Where do you want to go? What are your goals? Help me to understand that before I should ever give a shred of advice, right? Because no matter how much I'm going to invest my time to get to know their business and to build trust, they know their business better than I do. And so even just the respect of asking them that question and showing, I'm going to collaborate with you, I'm going to be a partner. You know, I have a lot of really good ideas, but I want to make sure that they're usable. I want to make sure that whatever I provide you, I'm customizing to your business so you can actually implement it, because then there's going to be value there. And so the thing that I find where things can go wrong, and so I'm also very judicious about starting that relationship. Frost has a really great non-billable client code when we're developing clients or even relationships. I mean, I get calls that have nothing to do with law, right? You know, my son just is struggling with opiates. Do you know anybody in town that might be able to help? Yeah, absolutely I do. Here's a program or two, right? That's real value. Am I going to bill them for that? Well, I guess you could. I'm not. And there is a lot of pressure on lawyers to do that, but then it kills the relationship. So the idea is, but where I have made mistakes is where at times under the pressure have built something that I knew I probably shouldn't bill. And then that has hurt the relationship. And it's changed the paradigm of once I call the lawyer, the meter starts running. So what don't I do? I don't call the lawyer. So that's how I see it working. Well, I think a lot of it is, it's like anything else. And I mean, I got used to it with my kids. Like, they don't listen to anything I say. That's fine. But it's at some point, if you're talking to a client and you've got really good advice, and it's like we've served on board of advisors, right? And they just don't take your advice anymore. Well, hey, life's too short, right? I mean, our biggest thing that we have right now is our time. And so that's what seems to be destructive. Not that they don't always have to take it, but if time and time again, and you're seeing the same patterns, Jacob, over and over again, that to me is destructive. And at that point, it's like, what's your purpose? You might as well go on and work with somebody else. And you know where that organization is going to go, because if they're not, they're paying you for the advice. It means they're not talking to anybody else in their organization or listening. That organization is going down very quickly.
Peter, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'd like to add to, I mean, and it is really just what Todd was saying, which the key words there to me, they're the partnership. If we, at the very beginning of our work with a client, we contract with them, lowercase c, but it's that conversation, right, to say, how are we going to work together? What are the things you expect of me, and what are the things I can expect of you? And some of that is, what's that partnership like? When we're giving you guidance, how are we doing this together? We're not a pair of hands. We're not going to come into the organization and say, you have to do this, this, and this, but that's that collaboration that makes a huge difference.
What was I going to say? I think what we've identified is engaged clients. So, they might call you in sort of a panic over something. And you really have to get past that and say, okay, what is it you think you need here, and how do you think I can actually help you? And there are times it may not be you. It may be something else. It may be someone else. And so I think it's worth our time as consultants to spend the, the few minutes of really trying to engage the potential client and saying, what is it you need? What is it you think you need? And here's how I think I can help, or here's who I think can help you. So I think it's probably just taking a deep breath and just kind of really trying to evaluate as best you can.
What's kind of interesting about marketing is I think marketers, we've made it really hard to think about marketing. We use all a bunch of words that a lot of them are the same thing. And our benefit is all about confidence. So a great engagement is when I'm having a conversation back and forth with my clients. And at the beginning, I actually don't have that. They're ready to listen and go do, but they don't really know what they're doing yet. They don't really understand why they're doing it. And so that becomes destructive if they never engage enough to actually start thinking about it and becoming confident on their own. Because I'm like the rest of them. I want to back out. I want to put myself out of business with this client because I need to go help somebody else as well. So it's really good when they listen. I do love that. And they engage and they actually follow through. But the biggest thing I found is I need them to begin to say, no, wait a second. Have you thought about this? And then honestly, that's where the true collaboration comes in. And together, we come up with some of the coolest ideas. We are not arrogant. We're not going to come in and tell you I've done everything and I know it's the best way to do it. We'll come in with expertise and discipline that maybe you haven't had before. But the real power is when we're working together. So those are our favorite engagements, when we're beginning to see their confidence at a level where we're beginning to talk a bit more like peers of marketing. And so that's what's the most fun as well.
Any other questions? Tim? Yeah, but then you're next over here.
We haven't really mentioned fractional finance, but fractional CFO, you want to ask this. At what level should you probably realistically have a full-time CFO? And is it better if we have a full-time controller who does a great job, but he has asked for 15 minutes at the level above the level he has, right? So we're thinking, should we get a fractional CFO to coach our controller, but also to help kind of lay the path forward from 30 minutes? So, is anybody able to speak for what fractional?
It's really a function of where you're at and where your organization is at. So that's something we do because quite frequently a controller, maxes out, right? The human only has so much bandwidth. And so when you're taking care of operations and managing all of that, getting to be able to set aside the time to do the strategy and the forward thinking is what all business owners hope their controllers can do, but it's quite difficult from a time perspective. And I wrote that down as one of the words that I was thinking of today is strategy. That is something that everyone up here can help with because that is a hard thing to go out and fulfill full time in the marketplace. So I would think for that controller, it may be just sitting down with someone in a fractional CFO capacity and just spending a few hours with them and say, hey, this is where I'm at. What do you see? Can you help me here? And so I would think you're probably right at the point where you could use a fractional CFO if you're growing, if your controller is performing at a level that you want them to, but know that there's only so much bandwidth there. Then yeah, I would think it'd be a great time to sit down and talk with somebody and say, hey, this is where we want to go. What do you see? And then at that point, you can start to evaluate. I mean, we have some metrics as to what you should spend on your accounting and finance function, a couple percentages of sales. But that's always a choice of how much to spend on your accounting and finance function because we're the accounting and finance function, right? We don't generate sales. We just count the pennies. Yeah, so I would say if you're asking the question, you're probably ready for it. If you're considering it, you're probably ready for it because that's it. You're an engaged client. You know what you think you need to get to the next level.
Can I add real quick too? And spot on. So strategic CFO is like an honest lawyer, right? Like that's a complete oxymoron. No, and honestly, if you can find a strategic CFO, hire them yesterday. But I would say, yeah, exactly. So I would say knowing your company, what are you hearing? You got a guy who's a cultural fit, who's very talented and very smart and wants to be mentored. So, but yet has never ever been a controller, much less a CFO at a $50 million, $100 million, which is your trajectory. And so to be able to bring someone in sends a great message to him that you're going to invest in him. And also it's not super threatening because it's a fractional CFO that's got a shelf life. Like they're not going to be there permanently. And you may find you've got an absolute diamond in the rough, just needs to be sharpened. And now you've got a cultural fit, someone who knows your company. You've got organic growth. You've got people in your company going, we're hiring because we hire really, really well. We develop them and they go to the next level. So all in all, I think it's a great message.
Yeah, I just want to add that the one thing that I heard down here was strategy. I think that is the big reason, in my opinion, that you look for fractional outside help or any type of consultant is you're looking for a strategy that you can't develop internally to your own resources in your company. Either you're a really small company, you don't have those, or you just haven't had that experience. I jokingly call this the been there, done that, I bought the t-shirt kind of philosophy. In other words, I've already run an organization this big. I've already done this kind of legal work. I've already done all these things before. I can do it again for you, and I don't have to do it full time because you can't afford me full time. You don't want to, and I don't want to be there full time either. Is typically what most of us would say. I think there was a question right here. Yes. Yeah.
What I find intriguing about the fractional model is that you get so many different examples, and you're really able to sort of borrow a best-of-breed advisor to get that level of expertise. So my question to you is, with your new engagements, what is the biggest theme that you see?
Do you want any specific person to ask or all? So I'll start because there's a big theme that's been going on, and we kind of all alluded to this at the beginning of the conversation, and that is we're all here, we're not wearing masks, and this might be the biggest organization, the biggest grouping of people you've been in a long time, or at least, for the most part. Unless you went to a Reds game, but that was probably not as many people as we have here. So the biggest theme has been on the sales side that I think every company is grappling with was we pivoted, maybe effectively, maybe not effectively for COVID. That caused us some grief and we had to do some things different. Now we think we have to pivot back, but should we forget all the stuff the new things that we learned, how to be remote for in sales? How do I do more things remote as opposed to be face-to-face, which just drives up the cost of sale? Those types of questions are becoming top of mind in most of the leaders that I talk to. And I see a few people that kind of do the same thing I do in the audience are kind of shaking their heads saying yes, so I think I'm hitting it on right. That whole idea of what did we learn and should we continue to do it? How do we mold that with what we did? And we kind of forgot what we did too. So maybe you can help us with that. So that theme has been over and over again through all my clients, all the people I talk to, all the business owners I've talked to is, what do I do now? Okay, so I'd be interested.
The theme we've had actually for quite some time is less is more. A lot of times I see a lot of fear in our clients and they're scattering everything. Oh, I'm going to do all these things. I'm sure all this activity is going to help me. So the biggest theme, and it's going back to focus, one of you talked about focus, is do a few things really well. And at IMS back in the day, we called it do a little, learn a lot. And that is this whole idea of pivot and all of this is really do something that you measure, you understand, and then you go do more of. And a lot of where people fall, I think in a lot of places, marketing especially, is you're just doing activity because you think you should. And so less is more would be the theme I see pretty consistently. And even more now coming out of COVID, it's like, well, do I need to go back to all those events? Well, I don't know. Did you lose anything when they were gone? Like, let's talk about what's the impact versus going back to the old things, to your point. Do I just have to go do all of that? Maybe not. Let's think about it.
Anyone else?
I would say forecasting, cash flow, and short-term, long-range planning. If I had any conversation with a lot of people, it was like, oh my gosh, the world stopped. And I work with a lot of contractors. A lot of contractors just sort of stopped working. And so if they didn't have some of that solid information already under their belt, they were scrambling for it. And so I would say we've had more conversations about that type of work and that type of thinking than anything else.
Yeah, in our world, in human resources world, clearly you can imagine a lot of what's happening right now is about retention, and attracting employees as well. So for us, we really, though, for years have been talking to employers about, you have a great story. You do so much to engage your employees. Talk to them about it. Do some marketing internally. Help them remember why they're here and that the grass isn't greener. So now that employees are starting to look out that the grass might be greener somewhere else, we're saying, get that messaging out there. So right now, that is such a big piece of what we're working on, is helping them with that retention and helping them with engagement and then that attraction.
I was just going to say, and trying to get supplies and goods. People are obviously critical, but just really kind of navigating that. And I think part of that is, talking to a couple people right before this is, if you didn't sit there as a leader and you didn't spend time thinking about what is it that we do better than anybody else, who can we partner with that does something that we'd like to do to shore up our supply chain or joint venture with them and get some knowledge and think more like that and think about what do we really focus on. That's helping those people that are having supply chain issues but even those folks are struggling, right? So, but I think that's part of it is get out of the fear mode, right? Particularly if you're leading the organization, because everybody's watching you and they figure you got more information than everybody else. And if you look like Eeyore, guess how that's going to affect the morale of the organization? It ain't going to be good. So, so just be a visionary, and that's what you're being paid to do if you're leading an organization, is to be thinking about what is our why? How do we communicate that? How do we retain people by saying who we are, because that's our culture, and how can we strategically be thinking about shoring up things like labor and retaining in an absolutely the most competitive market ever, as well as making sure we're finding supplies to be able to deliver and not be in default.
Okay, thank you for that question. That was awesome. Another question? Oh, Ryan.
We have a panel here, very humble individuals, but anybody who feels like speaking up, I'd love to hear your favorite testimony. Maybe one favorite testimonial you got from a client, man, I just think you feel really good about what I was able to do.
I'll just say it. My favorite testimonial is when the CEO called me and said, I just sold the company. By the way, you're going to lose your job. But I just sold the company for 50% more than what it was worth 10 months earlier. Thank you very much. It was all yours, Sean. That was my favorite testimonial. I said, can I put it onto my site? And he goes, I'll say it to anybody. You can't put it on your site. So, but that was my favorite testimonial. 50% increase in valuation.
I was going to say, and a lot of us work in the middle market, and I think sometimes I get more out of it than I probably give, because the middle market is so appreciative of what we do, right? And I mean, I've worked with big and small, medium-sized companies, but what we do makes a difference in the life of a company. And so I know one that is really exciting is we started with a $7 million startup as their outside GC, and you'd think, well, too small. But we have 17 different lawyers that have worked with this company on everything from cybersecurity to Bitcoin to real estate to they actually got a letter, and maybe you all have seen this, and that is from a troll out in California that says, oh, a nice website, but it's not inclined towards those who are visually impaired. And so under California law, you've got damages and treble damages. And we're like, oh, that's got to be nonsense, right? It's like the Ethiopian prince calling you and, I need cash. It's true. And because it's the internet, it's reaching California. California law applies. Well, lo and behold, he calls me. He's freaking out. And we have somebody in our DC office that's worked with that same lawyer over the last 6 months and resolved it in about 5 weeks. At very minimal cost, and actually they were demanding some exorbitant sum for a minimal amount. That was exciting when he called and said, now I get what's going on here, because whoever it is are going to help us and they're going to get it done. And by the way, I'm sleeping much better at night, and that makes you feel good.
Anybody else? Great testimonials?
Well, to me, one of the things that Todd said earlier too, that is that moment when I think, oh, this is the best testimonial at all too, is when we have a client that calls us for something that isn't necessarily, in my world, HR related, where they say, do you know somebody who, right? And you realize, yes, we're your advisor. And then we literally had a client that said, I couldn't do the things. I brought you in to help with a compensation study. And 2 years later, I rely on you to help me find a fractional lawyer, attorney, a fractional CFO. I mean, That to me, I am so grateful for.
We're all going to have to go now, right? Yeah. No, so I think.
You don't.
Yeah. Mine's pretty simple. It's not numbers based. It's when someone says, "You've just helped me do something I've never thought I could do before," and I feel confident. And that's the end game for me. I love the numbers. Don't get me wrong, but that would be the best testimonial.
Last one I heard was, "You make running my business easy." I mean, and at the end of the day, just a simple thank you. If you can sleep better and not stress about paying for college or something, that's what makes me happy.
So I'm going to add just another partial answer to that. A lot of my value to my CEOs, to my clients, is that I help them solve problems that I have no idea how to do. And so there's a good number of people in the audience today. There's a couple of people up here that I have introduced to my clients. And I get a lot of value personally when my CEO comes to me and says, "Hey, Sean, thanks for doing that. Todd was awesome, or Amy was awesome, or Carter was awesome." And I really appreciate that personally, because it shows that I'm helping them even though I don't know what in the world these guys do. So that's great. I get credit for that. I think there was another question back here. Steve. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll do this one then back there.
So my question is actually, how often I just want to
appreciate for myself the length of time they're there. And when they're there, how do employees keep them? Are they an outsider that just stepping in, or do they become part truly of the company until it's time for them to exit?
Great question.
I can start with that. Well, for marketing, the first engagement for us our company is about 4 to 6 months. But our goal is confidence, so I can't handle a really bad transition at the end. So we will come on site. That's what we do like to do. A lot of times, honestly, people have full-time jobs, so it's usually like every other week when our meeting time is after the heavy lifting at the beginning. And we don't want to get too tight in. We don't want people to rely on us or think, "Oh my gosh, she's actually an employee," because then that makes it harder to leave. So we definitely have strong rapport, but we are about building up the people internally. Usually there's a junior marketing person or a couple of people. Our goal is to make them heroes. So we'll have a good relationship with them and of course with the leader, but we want everybody else to really look to them, those marketing people who are going to be there long term. So that's how we deal with it, I'm sure. And it ranges, like you said, depending on the need and the help they're looking for. But we try to stay integrated, helpful, but not ever blur to the inside, because then that's too much of a transition when we step back, which is our goal.
In our case, again, it does depend on what we're trying to accomplish, the size of the organization. The way that we manage how employees see us is once we come to agreement with our client on, okay, this is what it will look like. So for example, we're just starting to work with a firm that we're going in 2 days a week. That's going to work for them. We're helping to build an HR department. They haven't had HR before. So we've asked and we've worked with a senior partner to send out an email to all employees to say, you're going to see this person. This is where they're going to be located. And then we're going to go to the all staff meeting, because we think, especially in an HR role, most people look at us and go, "Oh, who's going to be fired?" We don't want that. That's not what we're there for. To Amy's point, really, we are there to help the organization and the employees in that organization be successful. So we want to make sure that people perceive what we are doing there well, and that they provide the information that we need, the reason we're there on site.
So for me, for sales, it does depend on the client, obviously, and what they need. So if they already have a VP of sales and they don't want that VP of sales to leave or to take another role in the company, then I'm going to be there less often, because that VP of sales is going to run the organization and he or she needs to be that person. So most of my interaction is going to be with him or her, and maybe the owner and some of the other department leaders. And most of the people won't know me that much. However, if I am actually the VP of sales for that company, if I'm doing truly a fractional role, the salespeople report to me at that time. Sometimes sales ops reports to me. that means I'm going to be there. But everybody knows that I am not a full-time employee. And I make it a point personally, and I don't know how everybody else does this, I don't walk around and chit-chat, at least not during 8 to 5. Now, if somebody's still there at the end of the day and or before the day starts and they're at the coffee machine, sure, I'll ask about how the kids are and whatever. But I will not chit-chat at all during the day. Last thing I want is for one of my client, the person's paying me, the CEO, everybody that I work for is a private company. I don't want him to think that, gee, Sean's just walking around wasting my money. So I'm very adamant about that. I'm there. I am working hard for that person, and that's my goal. And I don't want to ever have anybody think anything else. Back there.
So as small and mid-sized business owners, entrepreneurs, visionaries, you mentioned, we can sometimes be guilty of shiny object syndrome. Nobody's probably experienced that here. I can be guilty of that anyway. So you talked about it earlier, like kind of less is more, the simplification. You guys kind of recommend or espouse like business operating system, EOS Fractions, you mentioned that earlier, or great game of business or scaling up. Is there anything that you kind of encourage your clients to do to drive alignment, drive execution? Sean, you kind of talk about, hey, it's working now, don't undo it when I leave, right? But sometimes that alignment and that execution goes away. So I just wanted to have a take on that.
Amy?
We usually work with whatever's going on. So when we come in marketing, honestly, we prefer that there is already a business plan or some sort of organization that they're working through, or they have some sort of concept in their mind. So a lot of times when we get there, we are working within that. So it's actually the flip for us is that whatever you're working in, we will work with you in that. We're not going to come and then propose, oh no, you shouldn't do that. This one's way better. We're going to say, well, whatever works for you, we're going to meet you where you are, and we're going to build into that. Now, I do have, a lot of peers who work with Traction, a lot of really good concepts, and I will certainly say, you know what, I've had clients who work with this, and it seemed like it worked for them. But we generally are not recommending anything in particular.
I like Traction just because I think it really, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and it really gets them in the mindset of it's okay to have things you don't enjoy to do and that are sucking the life out of you. And at that point, you need to bring somebody in because you're losing your salt and what you're able to bring to the table. But I think the nice thing about it is it talks about the companies I see that fail quickly is they collapse under their own weight. So they add too many people. They have a lot of shiny pennies and a lot of great talent out there, but they're not ready to support that with cash flow on a regular basis because you only run out of cash once. And so it's the first lesson I learned from my CFO at Baker. He goes, just remember that lesson, unless your owner can infuse capital, which sometimes you have to do. But so I do like that system. I agree. If they don't have that system, I think another really good thing for an emerging business is to get them a board of advisors. And just to bring somebody who can come in, there's an accountability every quarter where they've got to report what they're doing. It's not governance because entrepreneurs don't want board of directors, right? Board of advisors they can accept, but there's accountability. There's also the ability for them to be advocates as they get to know your business. And the reality is they're bringing experience, if you've set it up right, that you can tap into for literally very little. And so that kind of helps them to start thinking about how they scale for growth.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I don't care. I love it that they have a business operating system. I think that's great. Most business operating systems don't do a lot on sales, unfortunately. So one of the first things I'm going to do is shove a couple extra books. Is if they read some books, they read Scaling Up, they read Traction, one of the other Gino's other books that maybe he put out, or they read Jack Stack's book because he said Great Game of Business. If they've done all those things, I'm going to shove a couple extra books under their nose right away and say, you need to understand sales a little bit more because those guys, they're not salespeople. The guys that wrote those books, they're great people. All of them. The guys who wrote those books are fantastic. But they're not salespeople. And we're going to have to do a sales plan for the company. And that's one of those things that I'm going to drop off, not the last day that I walk out, but we're going to get it done towards the end, and I'm going to be dropping off. And that's going to be your EOS plan for your company on sales. So I love the fact that they have an operating system because that's what I'm going to build off of. So by my clock, Mark, are we correct? This is it? We're done? So thank you very much for all your questions. I'm sure there were more questions. We're going to be around. There's a beautiful view, if you haven't seen it, on that side of the building. So please go check it out. Please come ask us more questions. There's other people in the audience that you surely need to meet. If you want to meet somebody and you're like, you know, like that person over there, I don't know who that is, I will introduce you. And even if I don't know that person, I'm going to introduce you. Okay? So just come over, grab me. I'm one of those people that I will introduce you to anybody that I know or don't know. But please meet each other, stick around, talk a little bit, talk to us, and have a good time this evening. Thank you very much.